Hi, folks, and thank you for joining us for the Missouri Department of Conservation's Wild Webcast on wild turkeys and turkey management in Missouri. I'm Joe Jarrick, your host, and I'm with the MDC Communications Unit. And today we are joined by our guest expert to talk turkey, Reina Tile, who is the MDC Wild Turkey Biologist. Thanks for joining us today, Reina.
Thanks for having me.
And again, folks, welcome to our Wild Webcast. You can share your questions in the comment box on the right side of your screen throughout the presentation, and we'll answer those as we can. So before we kind of jump into it, Reina, again, let's get to know you a little bit better and kind of your background with turkeys and conservation and everything. Tell us more.
Yep, so I've been with the department now as the turkey biologist for about a year. Prior to that, I was at West Virginia University in grad school where I studied wild turkeys up in South Dakota. And so that's really where I gained a lot of my knowledge and experience about this bird. And then prior to that, I had worked, other various wildlife jobs around the country. And after I had finished my bachelor's degree from Ohio State. So been a lot of places and have experienced different wildlife research across the country, and really happy to be here in Missouri working with such an awesome species as the wild turkey.
Well, and we are happy to have you. And again, welcome to Missouri. And I mean, wild turkey, iconic bird, one of the top kind of game species in the state. So you're going to help us understand a bit of the history, biology, hunting trends, and where we're going with turkey hunting through revising our wild turkey management plan.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
let's get into it.
Yeah, so the two main, reasons why we wanted to have this webcast today, one of which was just to provide some background information on wild turkeys and turkey management in Missouri, and then also kind of talk about some of the current population trends and why we're here. And then we also wanted to raise awareness of the fact that we are in the process of revising our wild turkey management plan, and then talk about, that public comment period that's ongoing right now, and give folks the information they need to engage and provide their comments.
Right, and comments are very important. We always kind of say we mix that science and data-driven, research-driven information tied in with public input to kind of develop the regulations and things that we do. So it's that great combination, and we're looking for public comments, and we'll tell you more about that. Let's kind of continue with the turkey biology and the ecology.
Okay, yeah, we'll get started with some information about that. So just, some background, a lot of folks probably know this, but the wild turkey is a culturally and economically important game species, not only in Missouri, but across North America where it exists. And Missouri has one of the largest turkey populations of any state in our nation. And we have over 100,000 hunters that pursue wild turkeys in Missouri each year, whether they're a resident here in Missouri or they come here to hunt this bird. So it's an important resource for a lot of folks.
It is, and like we said, the wild turkey is an iconic American bird. It's a main game species, not only in Missouri, but around the country.
Yep, and wild turkeys, they exist across a broad range, and there's 5 different subspecies. We have the eastern subspecies here in Missouri, and on this map you can see that's the blue color that you see, and man, I mean, they cover a lot of ground. They live in a lot of different habitats across the U.S. And so, yep, just a really interesting.
Right, definitely the most common subspecies from looking at that map and all the blue.
Definitely the broadest range, yeah. And so, like we said, they're the largest game bird we have in North America. They're really closely related to pheasants and quail and grouse, some of those other large-bodied, ground-dwelling, chicken-like birds. They're characterized by having short beaks and wings, and they spend their daylight hours on the ground foraging for food and those sorts of things. And then at night, they roost up in trees, which I always think it's kind of, funny that people who aren't familiar with turkeys learning that such a big bird sits up in trees at night is always kind of exciting.
Right.
For
I mean,
folks.
they fly and they can fly well, but they're not known as being flyers.
No, yeah, they mostly spend their time walking and running away from predators, but they will fly to evade predators and then to come in and out of the roost at night. And so, just some jargon as we go through this presentation. Adult males are sometimes referred to as gobblers, and then we have the juvenile males, which are also referred to as jakes. Females we call hens, and sometimes people will refer to the young females as jennies. And then really young birds that, are born that year, the tiny little turkeys you see running around, we call those poults.
So kind of the chicks, those are the poults, and the
Yep.
adult males also called toms.
Yep, people will call them toms too.
Toms, gobblers. All right.
And so wild turkeys, they are they're a generalist species. They exist in a lot of different habitats across a broad variety of landscapes. And so we find them throughout the state of Missouri in every county that we have. They're adapted to utilize a bunch of different land cover types so that you can find them in woodlands, grasslands, and even some agriculturally dominated lands as well. They're what we would consider an opportunistic omnivore. So they eat both plant matter and animal matter, and their diet changes as different food sources become available throughout the year. So when, green things like grasses and forbs are available during the spring and summer, that is kind of one of their main food sources. And then they'll eat various nuts and seeds throughout the year as those are available, fruits later in the summer. And they also eat insects and other invertebrates like snails. And they're even known to eat the occasional vertebrate. They've been known to eat small salamanders and ground-dwelling vertebrates like that they can get a hold of.
They're kind of a little bit like the black bear of the bird world, where they eat what's available, and it varies throughout the year and as the seasons change. And again, in all of these different land types and types of cover. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so they utilize different habitats throughout the year, and they have different behaviors and kind of are in different social groups throughout the year. So in the fall and winter, you see hens and juveniles, the birds that were, born that summer, the young birds.
Jakes?
Jakes, but also young hens like jennies. They will get into these flocks to spend the fall and winter together, and we call those like the family groups. And then the gobblers or the toms will form bachelor flocks to spend the fall and winter together. And this is just a behavior that they have because there's strength in numbers. So when there's more, eyes in one area, they can detect predators coming. And also if there's more birds in one area, it's less likely that you're going to be the one that the great horned owl or the coyote goes after. So they spend most of their time throughout the year in groups unless they're engaging in certain behaviors like nesting, which we'll get into later. During this time, they rely really heavily on those hard mast foods like acorns on the ground. And then in parts of the state where we have more agricultural grain in, cornfields and soybean fields that were harvested, they will forage in those fields for food as well. And then by the late winter, those jakes that were previously hanging out with mom and their sisters in those family groups, they start to get, a little wild, and they break away from their family groups and form groups of juvenile males. And then the gobblers during that same time start fighting each other more to exert their dominance, figure out who the boss is and who's going to be doing most of the breeding that year.
Right, because the breeding season's coming up, and this is where they're kind of preparing for that, really.
Yep. And then once spring comes, we see those winter flocks start to break up. Gobblers will start associating more with hens, and turkeys will start consuming more plant matter as that becomes available. We start to see breeding occurring. Come April, we'll start to see birds breeding. Hens will start laying and incubating their nests. And once the breeding has occurred and hens are kind of going about their business, doing the reproduction stuff, male turkeys will get back into groups, with each other that they spend the rest of the spring and summer with.
So with turkeys, it's again the hen, the female, who takes care of the poults and raises them and all of that. The male kind of is back on his own, so she's really doing all that work.
She does all the work. Yeah, the only role that the males play in reproduction is breeding. Once they've bred the hens, they go on with their life and loaf about with their friends and eat food and try to survive predators. Well, and also during the spring, they're trying to not get shot, so that's important too. But yeah, it's really up to the hen to go about all of the reproductive activities. The whole nesting and raising the young birds that responsibility falls on her. And so then later in the summer, once poults have started to hatch, hens that were successful and have poults will form larger flocks with other hens that have young turkeys or poults. And then the hens that, weren't successful, after they've decided, okay, it's not going to happen for me this year, I'm not going to be
Breeding
successful.
season's over.
It's getting late. Those hens that weren't successful, a lot of times will form their own groups of basically unsuccessful hens. And then also during that summer period with the young poults out there, insects are a really important food source, for turkeys in general, but also especially for those young poults during the summertime. So.
Right, and that's that intensive growth, and the insects are a great form of protein, which the poults need for that quick development, as opposed to like grains and things with more carbohydrates.
Yes, exactly.
So the insects are the very important source of protein.
Yeah, and so just a little bit more information about how nesting occurs. Most nesting occurs from April through June. Turkeys are a ground nesting species, which makes them very vulnerable to predators during this time. The incubation period is about 28 days, which is 4 weeks long, and the hens will sit on that nest, all day and all night, except for when she gets up to, go eat some food or get a drink of water or go to the bathroom. So if you think about that, turkey spending 4 weeks sitting on the ground, I mean, that's a lot of time that she is really vulnerable to
right?
predators, and she's alone. So we talked about other times of year where they're in groups and they have other eyes to watch out.
Looking out for her.
Nope, she's got to look out for herself, and so they're really vulnerable to predators. They usually lay a clutch that's about 10 to 12 eggs on average, but most of those nests are lost each year, mostly due to predators. The good news is though, once if it's early enough in the year that the nest is unsuccessful, the hen will attempt to re-nest. So they do put a lot of effort into reproduction, and they will attempt multiple nests to try to get one that's successful.
Okay, and that's from April to June. So if early in the season the nest isn't successful, still if they're within that time.
Yep, they will try to nest again.
So you talk the only time she leaves a nest is basically to eat, drink, go to the bathroom, necessities. What happens if a hen or when a hen gets scared off the nest for some reason?
Yeah, so we do get a lot of people that inquire about this, especially when they're out hunting in the springtime. Hunters will flush a hen and they wonder, is she going to come back? And basically, if it's early on, so if she just started incubating that nest within a week or so, it's likely she will abandon the nest completely. If she's put a little bit more time into it, so if it's getting close to the eggs hatching, maybe she's 3 or getting close to that 4-week mark and the nest is about to hatch, then she will a lot of times come back to it. So it's really dependent on how much energy she's put into that nest already. If she's invested a lot of resources and a lot of time, she's more likely to come back.
And a lot of folks think that, if you disturb a wildlife nest in any way, that the parents, because of the smell of human, will immediately abandon it. And the reality is kind of that maternal instinct and that survival instinct is a lot stronger. So they mostly will come back.
Unless it's early, mostly early on they will abandon. They pretty readily abandon, especially compared to some other birds. The good news is you don't have to worry about smell, because usually most birds don't have very good
they're more visual
scent. Yeah, they're more visual and auditory with how they take in their world. So you don't have to worry about your scent lingering, but turkeys sometimes they will prioritize their safety over their nest, especially if they haven't invested a lot of time into it.
You said the turkeys are much more visual, which, just as an aside, folks, that's why for fall deer hunting, camouflage works very well, because the deer are more scent oriented and don't see as well, whereas birds are more visual.
Yeah.
So that camouflage for turkey hunting is incredibly important.
It's very important, yes. And unlike deer hunting, where people put a lot of time into making sure they don't smell it all by washing their clothes and special soaps and whatnot, for turkeys, you don't have to worry about smell. You can go out there without showering. And as long as you have good camo and they can't see you, you're going to be good.
Okay, so thanks, folks. We have some questions coming in, and we'll answer those as we can. We have a question. Here's kind of if a hen's nest is destroyed and she needs to re-nest, she also needs to rebreed?
Yeah, so previously, we thought that hens could store the sperm from breeding for a long period of time, but What we're finding now is new research is coming out, and we're able to track the movements of these birds a lot more closely just with better technology. We're finding that, yes, pretty much if, her nest fails, she will have to go breed again in order to lay a new clutch.
Okay.
The viability, or like how good the sperm is, it deteriorates pretty quickly after a couple of weeks. So she might still have it in her system, but in order to ensure those eggs are going to be fertile and they're going to hatch,
need to remate.
She will oftentimes go find a gobbler again and mate again before she tries to nest.
All right.
So so hens, they hatch one brood per year. So once they're successful, they're gonna, spend time raising that brood, and they're no longer gonna try to nest. Their young is what we call, or those poults are what we call precocial. And so that means that when they hatch out of the egg, they have feathers on their body, their eyes are open, and they're ready to get up and walk away from the nest within 24 hours. And this is really different from something like a bluebird or a cavity nesting bird, where
that takes where both parents are required to feed those birds for several weeks before they can leave the nest, whereas turkey poults, boom, hatched, they're ready to eat on their own. If we got some more questions coming in, and just to clarify, somebody's asking how many hours of day she's on the nest, and will they triple clutch? So I think, as you said, she's on the nest 24/7 except to the necessities, and then they'll do a second brood if necessary, but a third. What are the chances of a third brood?
So yes, we're learning more about how often they get up from the nest and how long they spend away from the nest now, as we have better technology and we can track them better. And we're finding they maybe recess more frequently and for longer periods of time than we previously thought. So that's something that we're still learning about. But yes, they will triple clutch. So, it depends too on how long the breeding season and nesting season is. In more southern climates where it's, warm for a greater period of time, you might see that more prevalently. Here in Missouri, we do have cases where turkeys will, try to lay a nest, it'll fail. They'll try again, and it'll fail, and they'll try again. And sometimes they are successful on that third one. But as it gets farther into the summer, they might eventually just stop trying.
So nesting again runs from April through June.
About, yes.
All right. And we said they're precocial?
Yes.
Pronunciation. So as soon as they hatch, they are ready to go.
And that's an adaptation that most ground nesting birds have.
Quail are the same way. Waterfowl?
Yes, ducks are the same thing. If you're on the ground and vulnerable to predators, you've got to be able to move as soon as possible.
All right. So 2 weeks old, they can already fly.
Yeah. So about, they can start flying earlier than that, but they're not very strong flyers. At about 2 weeks old, that's when they can start roosting in trees at night with the hen, and their survival increases like, a lot at that point. And if you think about it, if a hen's successful, she spent 4 weeks on the ground incubating her clutch, and then she spends an additional 2 weeks on the ground roosting at night on the ground with her brood. So those 6 weeks where she's, going about those activities, she's really vulnerable to predators, and then obviously her nest and her brood are as well.
All right. And we're getting questions on predators and how they're vulnerable to what predators. So let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So turkey survival, on average, we see about 60% hen survival throughout the year. Obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but during the spring and the summer, when they're going about the nesting and brood rearing activities, that's when they're most vulnerable. So that's when we see the lowest survival. And their greatest source of mortality each year is due to predators. So we don't lose very many hens from human harvest, but we do lose most from predators.
That brings up kind of a point. Folks ask why for fall turkey harvest and the harvest of hens is allowed, and why is that if there's an impact to the hens?
Yeah, so, it seems counterintuitive to harvest hens at all. I mean, we definitely don't want to harvest them in the spring when they're going about their reproductive activities. But in the fall, what we find is that we harvest such a small percentage. We did a recent study in Missouri where we found that fewer than 1%, or about 1% of our entire hen population, is harvested in the spring, which amounts to, just a few hundred birds.
Is that in the spring or the fall?
Oh, sorry, in the fall. I misspoke.
Okay, so when folks ask why allow the harvest of hens in the fall, our research shows that less than 1% of turkeys harvested in the fall are hens, so there's not an impact on that.
Yep.
And then as we're talking predators, and we'll kind of get back into this, but a common question we get talking predators, do wild turkeys then eat quail eggs? Because a lot of folks think that turkeys are predators of quail eggs and poults.
So no, not really. It's one of those things where, you know, the same things that predate quail eggs will also predate on turkey eggs. So a lot of times they share those same pressures. It's not, there's no there's not been any documented cases of turkeys having a big impact on quail eggs or quail populations in that way.
I
No.
don't know. It could happen, but we have no scientific
It
research
could
or evidence that it
potentially
does.
happen, but not very readily.
So what does prey upon turkeys?
So yeah, you know, the males have usually a little bit lower annual survival each year, and most of their mortality, or most of the reason they die, is from us harvesting them.
Yes.
So a lot of times their survival throughout the year, it's really dependent on how heavily we're hunting them. Years where our harvest rate, so the percentage of males we're removing through harvest, is high, you might see about 40% male survival. In years, if we have lower harvest rates, maybe you're only harvesting 20% of the male population over the year, then you can expect to see greater annual survival. You might see 60 to 70% male survival throughout the year. So we really drive the male segment of the population's abundance.
Right, and those mature toms oftentimes get, pretty big. So a lot of these smaller predators aren't so much as a threat. And let's talk size here for a moment. So a hen kind of weighs in on average
about 10 to 13, 10 to 12 pounds.
Okay, and then a tom or a male, a
They'll
gobbler?
be significantly larger. They're usually 20 to 25 pounds.
Okay, and then we do have some records. So as far as the United States, according to the National Wild Turkey Federation, the largest turkey harvested in the U.S. is what?
It was an eastern bird that was harvested in Kentucky, and that bird weighed almost 38 pounds. So he was quite a large tom. Here in Missouri, our record for the largest tom was set in 1990 with one that was harvested, and it was 33 pounds. So it's not impossible for them to get quite large, but it's definitely more rare. Usually 25 is kind of near the upper limit of how big they'll get.
Good to know. Kind of fun facts to know. Let's go back to, again, these predators, just that quick list. What's the most, so as we look at this, when they're eggs, skunks and snakes and just about everything.
Yeah, so the thing about turkeys is as they get bigger, fewer things eat them. So lots, as you'll see, you know, lots of different things eat nests. Most of, or a lot of those things also eat poults. And then the fewest amount of predators go after the adults, just because they're you know, bigger and harder to get at. And the big predators for adult birds here in Missouri are coyotes, bobcats, foxes, and great horned owls. Those are the main ones that we worry about.
So a little bit of the history. We, again, are one of the top states in the country still for wild turkeys. We did a lot of restoration. And at one point in Missouri's history, they were everywhere. And then pretty quickly, they were almost nowhere in the state. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so historically, so before Europeans colonized Missouri, turkeys were abundant throughout the state, except for some of the more prairie-dominated areas of West and North Missouri. And then once we started to settle into Missouri, you know, this was before state agencies, you know, existed. And so wild turkeys were nearly extirpated from the state due to unregulated harvest and also habitat loss as we were settling.
Right, let's back up. So extirpated is kind of that scientific word for wiped out locally.
Yes. Yeah, it basically means, you know, extinct would mean they don't exist anywhere. Extirpate means they don't exist in a particular area. So they were almost removed from the state of Missouri. But we still had some pockets of birds that existed in the steepest parts of the Ozarks where it was just hard to get in. And so, you know, we had some early efforts to increase turkey numbers by releasing pen-raised birds. But what we found is that they didn't really know how to survive in the wild very well.
It's kind of the same with a lot of times quail, pheasants, things like that. Pen-raised birds don't make it.
Just ends up being kind of like a put and take type situation if you're going to harvest. So then, you know, the efforts to restore turkeys really started to ramp up by 1950. And, you know, MDC we had acquired some properties down in the southern Ozarks where some of these remnant turkey populations still existed. And we started to intensively manage the habitat in those areas, and also obviously made sure nobody was harvesting the birds in those areas. And the turkey population really began to grow significantly, pretty quickly. And
right. A couple of those areas, I believe Caney Mountain Conservation Area was one area of a lot of turkey restoration, and then Peck Ranch Conservation Area was another of those areas down in the Ozarks.
Yep, those are two of the main refuges that were the part of the early restoration efforts. And so then we had these wild bird populations that were growing, but in order to really restore turkeys throughout the rest of the state, we would need to be able to capture them and move them. And for a while, we didn't really have a method of doing that until about the mid 1950s, with like the invention of what we call the rocket net or the cannon net.
Which that's the photo in the lower left showing a rocket net kind of going off. So why don't you paint that picture for us, a little bit of how it works?
Yeah, so what that looks like is it's a big net, about 60 feet by 40 feet, that is propelled by 3 or 4 rockets. And it's,
so the net's stuffed into kind of the barrel of the cannon and shot out.
Yeah, or sometimes it's just laying on the ground, but you have these heavy metal, they're essentially a rocket that has an explosive device in it that propels it, and you bait turkeys into that area, usually using corn or something like that. And once they're on the bait pile and their heads are down and ready to go, you can shoot that net, and it basically shoots over them really quickly, because turkeys are fast.
Right.
And so
they can't run or fly that fast, though. So
sometimes they still are able to make it out. Yeah, some are
Mhm.
still able to make it out just because they are quick. But for the most part, once this net was invented, we were able to capture groups of turkeys more readily, box them up, and
on the
move
right-hand picture, so the
Mhm.
cannon net goes off, we capture the turkeys, we kind of box them up briefly, and then they're taken to these refuge areas,
Well, we would capture
or
them
from the
in our
refuge
areas,
areas, and then those are restocked. And
elsewhere.
I think we've restocked turkeys everywhere, every county in the state, I believe, over time.
Yeah, so once we had the method of capturing them, we really needed to figure out what were the best places to start trying to restore turkey populations. And early on in the effort, we thought turkeys needed extensive areas of forest cover. We didn't think they could survive up in North Missouri where there wasn't a lot of trees. So we started, with our restoration efforts in southern Missouri, and then we had a successful restoration a successful translocation event in Adair County up in North Missouri. And since then, biologists, not just in Missouri, but across the country, this really changed the idea of what turkey habitat was. And so then we realized, okay, they can survive in some of these more open landscapes. And then by the late 1970s, we had moved over 2,600 turkeys to various sites throughout the state. And that really was the end of the restoration effort. Was about 1979. We stopped translocating turkeys because at this point they existed in every county, and we kind of just let them grow and do what they were going to do.
Right. So after we stopped kind of the stocking and they were growing on their own, we kind of reached a boom in a sense. So let's talk about kind of those trends in turkey numbers and harvest and things like that.
Yeah, so after those restoration efforts, us actually translocating them kind of came to an end in the late 70s. The turkey population continued to grow and expand as they started moving into unoccupied habitats. And that's kind of what this graph here shows. So it shows our spring turkey harvest and permit sales being the top line there. And basically, as the turkey population grew, we were able to provide more hunting opportunity, which is why you see the permit sales increase over time. But then also, just as there were more birds on the landscape, more people were interested in turkey hunting. So you really see the turkey population just kind of grow. And then eventually we reached this peak at about 2004 for our turkey harvest. And we believe the population abundance also peaked around that time. And since then, we've seen some declining abundance and some fluctuations.
So some areas it's declining, other areas it's still doing well.
Yeah, it varies across the state. We've seen steeper declines in some regions than others. So in that, after we reached our peak in the early to mid 2000s, during the mid to late 2000s, we saw some pretty poor turkey production during that time, and as a result, the population declined about 25% statewide, but over 50% in some areas, especially up in North Missouri. And something to note is this wasn't, just unique to Missouri. Our surrounding states like Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, they were experiencing similar pork production during that time and also saw declines in their populations during that time. And then, after 2010, so 2011, 2012, and 2014, we saw some improved turkey production. And because we saw better production, the abundance then kind of stabilized, maybe even started to increase a bit. And as most people are aware now, we've had a few years of poor production again. We're kind of in another one of those low points. Right. And so now, as a result, we've seen declining abundance across, most of our regions and at the statewide scale.
So when we talk some declining abundance and some poor harvests, we're going to talk a little bit about what's causing kind of the lower poult numbers and the lower levels of abundance.
Yeah, so production, we've been doing our turkey brood survey during the summer since 1959. So we have this really awesome long-term data set that kind of gives us a general idea of how production has changed through time. And what we can see from that in that graph that's up there is that production has been on a long-term declining trend for a few decades now. Again, this is not just a Missouri thing. This is something that was happening across the U.S., but things were so good for so long that we didn't really think much about it. And then in the last 4 years, we've had those record low production years. And there's a few different factors that are potentially contributing to this, long-term declining trend in production. One of which being some large-scale landscape changes. So as agriculture has, those methods have gotten better. We've seen a lot of conversion of grassland habitats into row crop agriculture, which has obviously reduced the amount of nesting and brood rearing habitat, especially in places like in northern and western Missouri.
Right. So with a lot of agricultural production, there's a lot of food for them, but there's a lot fewer places for them to nest and raise the young.
And I kind of talk to people like that's a double-edged sword sometimes. It does provide food for them over the winter that maybe didn't exist in the past, which is a positive, but it's reduced the ability for them to produce new birds, which we're finding is one of the main drivers of the population. So that's been mostly kind of an issue in the northern part of the state. In the southern part of the state, where we have more forest cover, we've seen forest maturation, which essentially means the forests have gotten older and are growing up, and people aren't harvesting as many trees as they used to. So they're not creating those sunny open spots on the forest floor where then grass and 4B green vegetation can grow up and create the ground cover that turkeys need to nest. So on a large scale, we've just seen, less suitable forest habitat for turkey nesting.
Because again, there's not in the mature forest. Imagine, folks, that canopy that covers the forest floor, and there's nothing growing really on the forest floor for them to eat, to hide, to nest, those issues.
So it's just trunks of trees and leaf litter,
so
and
not
there's
the open
nothing
areas
for them
like
to really conceal themselves. We've also seen changing weather patterns. So this one, it's been pretty obvious the last few years. We've had a lot of really intense storms that occur over a short period of time. So across the whole spring, we might not be seeing more rain on average than we saw 30 years ago, but we're seeing the rain falling in different patterns. So instead of more intense,
like almost flooding level, intense short rains, that those alone kind of wash nests away. The poults, if it's then cold, they can literally freeze. Things like that. So the severe weather, rain events, for example, because somebody was asking, does weather affect turkey numbers? And we're seeing very much so.
Yes. We've known for a long time that precipitation and temperatures can affect both nesting and especially those young poults before they have before they're 2 weeks old. Pretty much they can't thermoregulate very well. They don't have feathers to help them control their body temperature, and so they're really susceptible to dying from hypothermia when they get wet. And so like I said, we're just seeing the weather patterns are different than they used to be, and we don't completely understand all of the effects that is having, but that is potentially another contributor to why we're seeing poorer production now than we were 20 years ago.
Right. So as we kind of review, more agricultural land, more mature forests, more severe weather situations, that's all impacting. A couple other things folks are asking. So weather affects turkey numbers. the poults eat a lot of insects, and that's very important in a lot of agricultural production, chemical use, things like that. Do you know, are we seeing anything with, Missouri nationally with impacts from those use of
Yes.
chemicals in the insect populations? You know where I'm going with that.
Yep. Yeah. So across the US, people that have studied invertebrate bug populations, we are seeing, declining abundance in insects. And a lot of that is due to, habitat changes, but then also uses of, agricultural pesticides and insecticides. It's obviously good for us to be able to produce more food for us.
Sure.
So they serve a purpose, but obviously getting rid of insects is not good for the things that eat those insects.
Exactly.
So a
And
lot
that's
of
that
that's
chain.
birds, and
Yeah.
not just turkeys, but some of our grassland songbird species. We've seen declines in those due to this as well. And then also so that has, affected invertebrate, declining.
Bugs.
Yes.
Fewer bugs out
Fewer
there
bugs out there.
for turkeys to eat.
And those are, the main source of food for those young poults. So that could potentially be having an effect as well. And then across, the last 20 to 30 years, or I guess 40 years. How long ago was the 80s?
I know, yesterday or decades ago.
People probably remember in the 80s is when the fur market kind of crashed. And so raccoon pelts and coyote pelts and things aren't worth as much as they used to be. And at that time, we saw a lot of people stop trapping as much as they used to.
Right.
And so just kind of long term across decades, we've seen those predator populations increase. We've also changed the landscape in a way that really benefits those predators. They're able to search and forage really well in these linear agricultural landscapes that we've developed. So that is another factor that has also probably contributed as well.
So as we talk about kind of revising the plan, which we're going to be doing here, the research that goes into it, again, we address that the biggest kind of impacts to numbers, increased agricultural land, mature forests, predators, weather. And we try to look at all of those factors and see what we can and can't do to control that.
Obviously, we can't control the weather, with any real availability, but we can, to some degree, control habitat. And so it's trying to figure out how can we get habitat on the landscape that maybe mitigates the effects of that weather. So can we create grasslands that provide the cover that's needed so that birds can survive better, those sorts of.
And that ties a good question we had from someone. What could folks do to attract turkey to their property?
So, the big thing right now, and that what we're seeing, I guess, drive the population abundance appears to be production. So I always tell folks, if you want turkeys on your property, the best thing you can do is create nesting and brooding habitat. The best way to do that, if you're in a more forested landscape, is to do some like timber stand improvement, anything where you're cutting down some of those big canopy trees and allowing the sunlight to hit the forest floor. You'll see regeneration, you'll see growth. That'll create that shrubby, scrubby stuff that turkeys need to conceal their nests, and it also will create, grass and forbs that can grow up that will then bring those insects in, and then poults can eat those. So that's the biggest thing in a forested landscape. And then, in more open landscapes, it's just trying to get those warm season grasses and forb grassland type habitats established. So
it kind of comes down to habitat. If you want more turkeys on your property, create more turkey habitat. And how to do that? Well, one of the nicest things is we have private land conservationists all throughout the state who can visit with landowners, help them determine what those habitat needs are, help them come up with a plan for that. And again, they're available in every county throughout the state. So we encourage you to contact your local Missouri Department of Conservation regional office, go online at mdc.mo.gov and look up your local private land conservationist for help with turkey habitat on your land.
They'll be able to paint a more detailed picture of exactly what you can do on your property.
Right. So as we're kind of looking at that, we're gonna get into the revising the management plan. A couple other questions. I know with I think reptiles and some things, temperature determines sex or gender in an egg. So does the average temperature determine the sex of the poults, or any idea of what does?
I will admit I'm not a turkey physiologist, or that's right, I think.
Right. Super duper reproduction expert.
Yeah.
Right.
But no,
We're
usually
not doing DNA sampling or things like that here.
yeah, we're learning more about that stuff as we have more like genetic research that comes out, and we're
Mhm.
able to figure that, what the sex ratio of nests are. But no, it's not like reptiles where the temperature really determines the sexes. That's usually predetermined by like the sperm and the fertilization of the egg, kind of more
Yeah.
like people.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks again, folks. We're getting some great questions for you. We encourage you to submit your questions. We'll get to them as possible. And now we're going to get into revising Missouri's wild turkey management plan. So tell us a bit what's going on with that.
Yeah, so since, MDC's inception, we've really tried to manage our wildlife species here based on science and like the best research. But this isn't just knowing the biology of the species. We also take into account social issues. So, the desires of what people want, because we're not only, managing, especially turkeys, for people to harvest.
We serve nature and you, folks.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So, and MDC's wild turkey management program has evolved considerably since it was created. Since that time, we've increased our knowledge of turkey ecology and population dynamics a lot. We've expanded hunting opportunities as turkey populations grew over the years. And then we've also had an increasing importance on public input in our management. So just putting out hunter surveys and trying to figure out, how hunters feel about the resource and what they want to see. That's taken a bigger role in our management over the years.
Quick question from somebody. Hens with their poults, do they just really stay in a home area? Do they travel?
So the amount they'll travel,
how big of an area?
It will depend a lot on the resources that are available. So where she's nesting, if there's good brood rearing habitat right there or right next to it, they won't have to move very much. If they have to move a long way to find what they need, then they will do that as well. But obviously, the more they have to move, the more vulnerable they are to predators. Right. And so that's a lot of times something we see is the farther or the more movement that brood has, the lower chance of survival. Those
Interesting. So again, by creating great habitat, they don't have to travel as far, more survive. So a lot of it comes down to that habitat.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so with our plan.
Yeah, the previously established goal of our turkey management program was to protect the turkey resource. And then with that, in the 1970s, the commission finalized a couple of objectives that then guided turkey management. And those were to maintain and enhance the quality of the spring turkey hunting, and then also to provide hunting opportunity in the fall, as long as that fall hunting opportunity didn't have an effect on the spring season.
Okay, and you bring up a good point with that, where in the fall you're allowed to hunt hens, and as we said, folks ask why, because as a reminder, only less than 1% of hens harvested compared to the total population.
Yes, and what we found is even if, we closed that fall season and made it so like no hens were harvested, it wouldn't have a big difference impact on the abundance of the population.
Right. Yeah. So we started our plan originally to protect turkeys because they were still new, and then to promote hunting and opportunities to hunt, and it continues to evolve to even where it is now. One of the questions folks come up with: why does spring turkey hunting end at 1 p.m.? It's one of those big questions.
Yeah. So a lot of that was based on the best research that we had at the time. That basically said that hens, when the day got warmer, that was when they were more likely to get up from the nest and take a break to go find food and water, because they didn't have to worry about their clutch cooling down as much. And so we closed those hunting hours at 1, basically to try to reduce the amount of accidental hen harvest that would occur from hunting. Like I said, as research kind of gets better and we're tracking these birds.
So we're learning more and more as we go to.
Yep, we're learning more and more as like GPS technologies get better, and we can put those on turkeys and track their movements throughout the day. So, that's something that maybe could change in the future depending on what research shows us. And so, but that's kind of, and then it's kind of become tradition. So like once that was put in place, it just became a tradition of that's.
And part of our turkey management plan and revising it and looking at it and getting public comments are things like that. As research gets better, these are some things we're going to re-examine and maybe review.
Yep.
Another question we have, if we're getting lower turkey numbers, why don't we kind of cut that bag limit? So we're looking at a
Yeah.
longer trend and kind of the shorter action.
Yeah, and that's something that people ask a lot. Why don't we go down to, only one bird can be harvested in the spring, maybe only
Like
one or
longer
two could be
season,
harvested in the
shorter
fall.
season, things, all of that.
Yes. What we found is that even if we were to reduce the bag limit to one bird, most people only harvest one bird. It's a small number of folks that end up harvesting
Interesting.
two birds during the spring. So we found that even if we were to go down to one bag limit or one bird for the
It's not
bag
going to have a
limit,
big impact.
it
Most
wouldn't
people
have a
only,
big impact on
yeah,
the overall
as you
harvest and
said.
our overall harvest rate. Yeah.
Okay. And so we had the plan. We talked about the 70s, then in the 90s, we updated again in the focus on.
So our first real turkey management plan was developed in 1997, and that was the Wild Turkey Harvest Management Plan. And during the time that that plan was developed, our turkey population was still growing in abundance. We were approaching that peak abundance, and that plan has continued to guide our program since it was incepted in 1997.
Okay.
But obviously, like we talked about, since that time, we've seen considerable changes in not only turkey production, but also turkey abundance.
And science and technology and all these things.
Yeah, we're
right.
learning more information. Participation in our hunting seasons has declined. So we've been seeing declining fall firearms hunters since the 80s.
Right. And that's not really even limited to Missouri or turkeys.
No,
just
this
in
is something
general,
that everybody
right.
sees, well, most states see as well. But our spring turkey hunting interest has declined since the early 2000s. So just recognizing that, the turkey population and people interested in turkeys, it's changing. And so we need to change with it. And so that 1997 plan was basically just a harvest management plan. And that's kind of what it was put in place to do. But we're recognizing now that there are a lot of other facets to turkey management that we need to take into account. So this new plan we're looking to put in place is going to be more of a strategic management plan that has goals not only related to harvest, but also talking about population management and stabilization, goals related to habitat management, goals related to hunter recruitment, those R3 efforts, and also just providing other recreational opportunities for people to engage in related to turkeys. And then also some goals related to like public engagement and
right.
education.
Right, because we talked about, I think, a little bit, on average, we have, about 100,000 turkey hunters in Missouri?
Yep, a little over.
A little over 100,000, and kind of that average annual harvest is about 40,000 birds overall?
Yeah, across the spring and fall seasons, about 40,000 turkeys.
Okay, and then we also have, as our research tells us, about 1 million Missourians, or about 1 in 7 Missourians, who just love watching wildlife. They don't want to necessarily harvest it, but they love seeing wildlife. So that's also how we evolve, not just for the turkeys and the turkey hunters, but for really all Missourians to have that whole beautiful ecosystem, including just watching wildlife.
Yeah, and so this new plan, I'm just going to present the mission statement and goals of the plan here. We'll put the link up in a minute where you guys can go online and view the larger plan that has objectives and other information.
You can read all the details in the very detailed plan.
But yeah, so our new mission statement now is to use science-based methods, including public engagement, to manage wild turkey populations throughout Missouri that will provide quality hunting and other recreational opportunities.
Such as watching wildlife.
And then, we have these specific goals kind of based on what I had on the previous slide. So our first goal, more related to population management, is to use monitoring and research to maintain long-term stability of the wild turkey population. Our second goal, which is our kind of habitat management related goal, is to create, improve, and maintain habitats that benefit wild turkeys on both public lands and private lands in Missouri.
And again, you mentioned that because a key thing, more than 95% of land in Missouri is privately owned, so we can't do it alone, so we all have to work together.
Exactly, we've got to work with our private landowners to get that habitat out there. It's very important. And our third goal being to promote turkey hunting and provide opportunities to enjoy wild turkey related recreational activities. And then our fourth goal, which is kind of what we're doing right now, is to engage and educate stakeholders about wild turkey management through coordinated outreach.
Okay, when we talk wild turkey management, you showed some slides, and at this point it's statewide harvest levels and kind of all of that. What are we looking at as far as managing turkeys more on a regional level where we
Mhm.
see increases in some areas, declines in other areas, stable populations. So how do we break that down regionally, and
Yep.
do we?
Yeah, so in the plan you'll read under the first goal, we do have turkey regions that we have throughout the state, and these are areas that have similar habitat composition. We
Right.
see similar hunter trends and harvest numbers.
And I think if we go back quickly to a
Okay.
couple slides where it shows, I think we have the one slide
Oh
of all
yeah.
those turkey
Mm-hmm.
regions.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
there, so
Yep.
that shows kind of how naturally turkeys are broken down. They're
Yeah.
not easy, kind of like MDC regions, because we don't control nature.
Yeah.
That's just naturally how turkey
So yeah,
break
these
down.
regions, they were developed based on similar land cover in those counties,
Again, habitat.
similar harvest trends, similar trends in hunter numbers. There's a lot of different information that went into the development of those regions, but that way we could kind of look at how harvest and production is changing within those regions, and then if one region the population was increasing and
Mm-hmm.
the other region the population was declining, we could manage
Right.
things differently on a regional level according to what's needed in those specific
Right, and folks, while
regions.
we're on the slide, I'd point out too that this is some information that we really try to get out every year,
Mm-hmm.
whereas we can't divide hunting up into these complex zones, but we want hunters to know
Mm-hmm.
here's kind of those natural zones. So
Yeah.
take a look at this map, understand where you will be hunting,
Mm-hmm.
so you
And
can
right
have more
now,
information.
like right now, we manage turkey hunting on a statewide level.
Right.
But of course, if the population in northern Missouri was skyrocketing and was completely falling apart in the southern part of the state, we could potentially create zones or something and manage turkey hunting differently in different regions. It's just at this point in time, there hasn't been a real reason to do that,
Right.
but it's something that we continue
Right.
to evaluate. And if we ever saw the need for that, we could easily, go that route in the future.
Right. And again, what a great opportunity, because we're revising the plan, which
Mhm.
includes the science and research that you just talked about, and public input and kind of public opinion on things. So if people want to be part of revising our wild turkey management plan, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can read a draft of the current version of the plan at mdc.mo.gov/turkey plan. At that website, there's a PDF of the plan you can read, but we also have a link to a Qualtrics survey that you can go, and it'll prompt you to answer questions, and you can provide specific input on the different goals of the plan, and then just overall about turkey management in Missouri. And then in this comment period, it's open right now. It opened on June 1st, and it's going to
through the month of
continue
June.
through the month of June. So you have until the end of the month to provide your input. And then if you or anyone maybe doesn't have access to internet or something, and they still want to provide comments on the plan,
Right.
we're accepting written comments
Old
as
school
well.
snail mail
Yep,
too.
we want it
Right.
all.
So folks want to know, are there regulation changes that are pending as a result of changes to this plan?
So at this time, we aren't proposing any specific regulation changes. There's not any outlined in the plan itself.
Mm-hmm.
This is more just to create just an overall document that guides what we're going to do in the future.
Right. So we again can look at both the science research that we have in public opinion
Mm-hmm.
regarding changes, predators, changes in season hours,
Mm-hmm.
lengths, trapping, all of those things. This plan will help us understand those issues better in public thoughts on those better.
Yeah, so this is kind of more just like a roadmap of,
Right,
what are all of the important things we need to be considering when it comes to turkey management in Missouri. And then, but, every year we evaluate our regulations and look at if changes would lead to the results that we want to see. So that's something that we've already been doing on an annual basis, and we continue to do every year.
Okay, and again, folks, we're here today talking turkey, and again, encouraging people to read and comment on our wild turkey management plan. You can go online, mdc.mo.gov/turkey plan. You snail mail, you have through the month of June. And then what happens after June?
Yeah, so at the end of the month, we'll have all of these wonderful comments, and we'll compile all of them, read all of them. What we do is we take out, the main themes. So what are the ideas that keep coming up over and over again? What do Missourians really want to see? And we take those ideas, and that's what we'll be incorporating into the plan, into the final version of it.
Okay. We're getting some questions in, folks. We have a few minutes left, so we can answer a few more questions. One that we've gotten, you've talked the subspecies of wild turkey. Clearly, the eastern wild turkey is most prevalent throughout the eastern part of the country.
Hmm.
Folks were asking, do we have other subspecies in Missouri? And could Missouri support a different subspecies other than the eastern turkey?
So we do not have any other subspecies in Missouri. We just have the eastern. That's what was here historically, and so that's what we currently have today. Could we support other subspecies? Yes, potentially. Um, but there are some issues. Just there's small, I mean, they're all the same species. They
Right.
can all interbreed with each other. So if we introduce a different subspecies here, you have
Probably get,
interbreeding that happens between them, and it
yeah.
can kind of muddy the genetics up a little bit. And people, believe it or not, across the country, Easterns are known as being like the biggest turkeys, and they're the most evasive and elusive, and a lot of people
Best
consider
to
them the
hunt, best
most
to
fun
eat.
to hunt.
Right.
And so that's probably not something that we would consider doing, moving a different
Okay,
subspecies
right.
here.
And
Yeah.
again, they're here. We talk about getting a lot of public comment. Also, we work with a lot of partner organizations who also have an extensive wealth of knowledge and information in their areas of focus. You mentioned the National Wild Turkey Federation.
Yeah.
So touch on a little bit about how we maybe work with our organizational partners in turkey management and things like that.
Yeah, so even just in the development of this plan, we had a partner meeting where we met with members from the National Wild Turkey Federation, Conservation Federation of Missouri, the U.S. Forest Service, Missouri Bowhunters Association, just other folks that have a large stake in this resource and have their own scientists who
Right.
conduct research and have information. And so we work with them collaboratively to, take in what their thoughts are about what's important to turkey management in Missouri, what do they want to see happen in the future. And this version of the plan incorporates some of those comments that we've received from those organizations. So,
Wonderful, wonderful. And again, somebody was asking again, can you talk a little bit more about how landowners can help attract wild turkeys and increase wild turkey numbers on private property? Because we do a lot of habitat work on our public properties. But again, like we said, more than 95% of land in Missouri is privately owned. So if you could just touch again on how landowners.
Yeah. So the biggest thing right now, I know there's some landowners that are really concerned with like having food plots over the winter as a food source, and that's great. But really, what we need to see is better, nest habitat and brood rearing habitat on the ground. So harvesting trees to create that regrowth, that early young forest, early successional habitat, things grassy, anything you can do to establish warm season grasses and forbs and
food and shelter, kind of those basic needs.
And like you talked about, I mean, we have private land biologists or private land
conservationists
that are they're like the experts when it comes to this. So they can come out to your property and let you know what all you could do with it to realistically maximize what you can do on your land. And so I would highly recommend contacting those folks.
And the best part, it's all free.
Yeah.
So we have our private land conservationists who come out free of charge. We'll meet with you, help you come up with literally a plan for what you want to happen on your land and work with you on that plan. They can also turn you on to some federal funds that are available for habitat improvements. You're getting excited about that, Reina. Why don't you touch on that real quick?
Just wanted to make sure that
got a couple minutes left. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that yeah, there are cost share opportunities through different, federal funding, a lot through USDA, Farm Service Agency. So those private land conservationists can really help get you connected with those resources, so you don't have to put all your money into it. You're not alone. You don't have to do it all by yourself.
Exactly. We're all in it together. Again, folks, we serve nature and you, and we're here today talking turkey with our guest expert, Conservation Department's wild turkey biologist, Reina. We're wrapping up now, folks, so we encourage you to visit mdc.mo.gov/turkey plan to comment on our wild turkey management plan, which we're revising.
Yep.
So we want your comments in June, and then we'll follow up with that. And if you need more help from MDC, visit us online, call your local regional office. We are here to help. thank you again, Reina, for being here today. This has been incredibly informative.
I'm appreciative of everybody that has tuned in. I really appreciate all the good questions that we've gotten from folks, and I'm excited to see everyone's comments and see what they have to say about the new plan. And
Hopefully you have a lot of good reading to do.
I'm sure I will.
Okay, again, folks, thanks for joining us today, Talkin' Turkey with MDC Turkey Biologist Reina Tile. Please share your comments on our turkey management plan. And that kind of wraps it up. If you are interested in this or other MDC Wild webcasts, we encourage you to visit us online. Simply go to mdc.mo.gov, use the handy search tool in the upper right-hand corner, and just type in Wild Webcast.